You've got a big presentation coming up. You want to do an excellent job. I've often said on this channel that presenting well in front of others is the basis of leadership, is the basis of getting ahead in your career, does so many things for you professionally that it's worth doing well. So, what's the difference between an amateur and an expert? There's no one big answer. The difference between an amateur and an expert is 100 small things all learned and applied over time. So today I'd like to give you the most bang for your buck in terms of how to improve your slides quickly. 3 principles and 5 ways to do it. Principle number 1. A slide is a visual aid. That is all. We tend to get this wrong. People think that a slide should give all of the information, all of the background, that you take everything that you know, all your notes so that you remember your speech, and you put them all up on the slide. What's the first thing we hear a presenter say? They stand in front of an audience, look behind them, and realize that you can't read it. And they'll say, "I'm sorry you can't read what it says, but..." If you can't read what it says on a slide, that slide fails. A visual aid must aid visually. Its whole point is to be seen. That's its job. That implies that it needs to be big, bold, simple, and easy to process. If it doesn't help an idea to come alive, then it doesn't need to exist. Quite often we should even start by saying, do you even need slides for this presentation? If you do, then criterion number 1 is, does it help the audience to visualize and understand this idea? Principle number 2, stick to one idea per slide. Please don't build 50 ideas into a single slide. Each slide should have one big, bold, easy to consume and digest idea. Then, you are there to connect with the audience, not to be a voiceover to your slides. A lot of presenters will start their slideshow, turn their back on the audience, and then start to read. And they start reading at the top left and they finish reading at the bottom right, and if the person hasn't been to gym in a while, there's nothing interesting to look at anyway. So the audience drifts off. There's also a lot of research behind this one. The audience can read faster than what you can deliver. So, if you're reading the slides and they're reading the slides, here's what happens psychologically. They read ahead until they've got it. Then they switch off and they wait for you. Then you start the next slide, they read ahead until they've got it, and they switch off and wait for you. That will happen as many as 3 times, after which the audience switches off and stops listening to you. For that reason, PowerPoint slides can often do more damage than good. One bold idea per slide. So you're not there to do a voiceover, you're there to connect with the audience. The slides are only there to help you make an idea come alive. Here are 5 ways that you can design your slides to be infinitely more effective. The first one, make your slide the itch, not the scratch. What do I mean by that? Your slide should launch an idea, not shut it down. Or in other words, your slide is like an intro to a section of speaking. It is not the information itself. For that reason, you can even do things like a headline that is a question. Here's an example of a really good slide. This slide does not shut the speaker down by giving the resolution. Instead, it launches the speaker. It's the itch, and you are the satisfying scratch. That's the principle to keep in mind with slides. They're not there to be all your notes, and they're not the same thing as an audience handout. You can give all the dots and dashes and data and information in the handout afterwards, but you're there to connect with them. So make your slide launch you, not give away everything you're about to say. Your slides are the itch, not the scratch. For that reason, it's much more powerful to use questions than it is to use statements. I would take every slide that you've designed and take the main statement and turn it round into a question, like this. See the difference that makes? Now, using principle number 2, use questions, your slide is a launch pad, and it also engages the audience. Instead of sounding like a lecture, it sounds like an interesting challenge. Here's something we're about to discuss. What do we think of this? How will that pan out? What will happen next? Stay tuned. Number 3. Use large faces on your slide. Go into your favorite grocery store, walk past the magazine section. You'll see that every single one of the magazines has a massive face on it. There's a reason for that. Advertisers know that the human mind is more compelled to other human faces than anything else. Now, that's not to say that every single slide has to be a smiling person. But the more often you use this, the more effective your slides will be. It makes them visually attractive. Try to use faces as often as you can. Now we get into something about how the brain works, and this is not something many people know. At a Professional Speakers Association meeting, we were delighted to have someone speak to us from a cognitive perspective about how the brain processes slides. So simple, so effective. Do this. Put a large visual to the left and put your text to the right. Why? Because in cultures that read from left to right, we like to process in that direction, and the brain prefers a large image to the left and the text weighted slightly to the right. It's not an absolute hard and fast rule, but it's slightly more effective when you do it. The brain just likes it more. And what we ultimately want is an audience paying attention rather than drifting off. The more you make them work to process your slides, the more they drift off. Quick tip on that one. If you look around the auditorium and you see people going down to their phones and drifting away, what you do is start a story. You can see this in action anytime someone does a presentation. Charts and graphs and abstract representation, and the audience drifts away. Then you'll hear them say something like, the other day I walked into our offices and you'll see everyone look back up. To engage people, tell stories and use questions. Questions like the ones that you use for your headlines. So, make your slide the itch, not the scratch. Use questions in place of statements. Use large faces as often as you can. Put a large visual to the left and text to the right. Keep your text as large as possible as well and as simple as possible. Remember, it doesn't have to give away the detail. If you need to deliver detail in terms of numbers, charts, graphs, and so forth, you can have that as a small note in front of you. But you don't have to put it up on the screen. You want to connect with the audience. That's the itch, you're the scratch. Number 5, use large negative spaces. Take a look at advertising by high-end companies like Rolls-Royce, Mercedes, Cartier, pick your top brand, and you'll find that they don't do a lot of clutter. Now, go and check out a very cheap, high-pressure sales pitch advertisement by, say, for example, a grocery store. It's clutter and stars and exclamation marks everywhere. If you want to be perceived as authoritative, if you want to be perceived as doing something premium, use large amounts of negative space. People often ask, do you have to use white slides or black slides, darker slides? That one is entirely up to you, but you do want them to match thematically. So if you're going to do 5 or 6 dark slides in a row, it would be weird to have one light, cluttered slide with a lot of pink all over the show. My personal preference in terms of color scheme is somewhere between Batman and the Lord of the Rings. You might prefer the more clinical, apple brandy kind of look of a white background. Watch out for using red or green on black backgrounds. Sometimes they disappear when you're in the auditorium. If you're going to use animated text, if your text is going to fly in, make sure that it flies in from the right of the screen to the left. When you do it that way around, the eye reads the beginning of the sentence first, and that makes the brain process the wording more easily. You don't get that secondary glitch as the brain tries to work out what's going on with the text. So it comes in, either just appears, or it comes in naturally from the side that allows you to read the beginning of the sentence first. If you apply those few simple principles to your presentation, it will give you massive advantage. Just those few changes alone will totally elevate the feel, tone, and professionalism of your presentation. There are many other little tricks and tips that you can learn along the way, but those are the main ones. Now, what I'd like you to do is when you bring up a visual, preferably using a clicker so that you're not stuck at your laptop or machine, when you bring that up, pause for a half second, let the audience process it, and then you reconnect with them by launching into a story, an example, a metaphor, something that makes that idea come alive. So it's end one section of speaking, click, process for a second, gather up their attention, and then do the next chunk of speaking. Click, let them look at it for a second, gather up their attention, and tell them about that. Each slide launches you into the next segment of your speech. If you're pressed for time, try this little miracle of an approach. All you do is you ask yourself, what are, say, my top 5 points? Write them down in in statement form, in sentence form, then what you do is you turn each one into a question. Put that question up on the screen just like this. You don't even have to have a visual if you're really pressed for time. That is an excellent slide. You'll get the job done with it. If you have the time, add a visual to it. This is not a perfect example. The visual should be to the left and the text should be to the right, but it's a decent slide. Pressed for time, write out your points, turn them into questions, put the question up on the screen. Then one by one, you answer them. Remember, you are not a voiceover to a slideshow. Those are visual aids. They should aid visually. Then they should get out of the way. You are the main show.